Wamanjika, Marin Big Boon Wurrung, Namda Baruptan Ata Willem. Come with a purpose to our beautiful home, the lands of the two great bays. My name is N'arweet Carolyn Briggs, and I am a descendant of the first peoples of the Yalukit Willem of the Boon Wurrung language group of the Kulin Nation. It is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you all here this morning, but it is my responsibility to ensure that you do come with a purpose. But at Wamanjika, I do so not on behalf of my ancestors, the Boon Wurrung. I do so on behalf of all First Peoples on which lands we meet today. First Nations peoples across Australia all share a special connection to the lands and waters of their ancestors that has not been disconnected since millennia, despite the dispossession, the displacement, the discrimination that we've all experienced over the last 200 years. These connections date back to our creation stories. For the Boon Wurrung and the Wurrung, our creation stories tells us of Bunjung, our creator spirit, who travels as an eagle, and how he created the lands and waters around where we meet today. He also created the Kulin people, and he taught them about the circular relationships that they have with these lands and waters in order for us to be taken care of by the land. We also have to take care of the land, and we did this through adhering to our Wurrungibik, our laws of the land, our customary laws, much like our laws today. These laws dictated how we interacted with each other, how we interact with the land, and how we conduct ourselves whilst we're on other people's country. The Boon Wurrung Wurrungibik speaks of 3 Pacific laws. The first law is Yalenge, knowledge. It is the responsibility that we have knowledge. And once we've attained that knowledge, we then have the responsibility to ensure its survival, its continuation. We have the responsibility to our younger generation to maintain that knowledge and pass it down so it can be used for our Yurumboy or our future generations. We also have the law of Jambana. This law speaks of community, the importance of community, the importance of diverse communities, but a unified community. The Boon Wurrung people and the Kulin Nation understood the power of diversity that is within our lands that helps it increase its capabilities. It was good, it was always good to share our stories, stories and our different experiences. However, they understood how to utilize this very powerful tool. They had to identify a common purpose. And what is that? What are those things that we do have in common? Finally, the last law is our connection to country, or we might call it honouring Pavanata, or sacred ground, paying respects to our past generations, the people who took care of the land before us, the people who have lived and died on the land before we were here, paying respects to those stories and histories of a land in which we live today. We are very fortunate in this continent we now know as Australia to have 80,000 year plus of human history. It is most important to pay respects to that history, not only while we're here at work or also when we go home. And if we can adhere to those three Wurrungi biks, I can say in the language of my ancestors, Wamatika, Marim Bik, Baron Nermder, Baraptan Ata Willam, come with a purpose to our beautiful home. Nungujin.
Thank you, N'arweet. And I think that connection to place is something that we're all craving at the moment due to the disruption of the pandemic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in this panel called Places People Play. And my name is Troy Innocent. I'm an artist game maker. And I'm here with Boon Wurrung elder Dr. Carolyn Briggs, and also creative industries strategist Esther Anatolitis, and academic Quentin Stevens. And we're all coming from different perspectives, but we all share experiences of public space. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be asking about how we've played during the pandemic and how we can play after the pandemic, and what does that even mean after the pandemic. And so really what we're discussing today is the pervasive nature of play in culture and society, how it's embedded in our world, and how now that the pandemic has reset the world in a way, what are the kind of hopeful opportunities for the future. So by way of introduction, perhaps we can go around the panel and start by just sharing a few stories about how you might have played during the pandemic. So for myself, I mean, there's all of the obvious things, playing digital games as a kind of a way to get out of the workplace and into a kind of more recreational frame of mind on the weekend, try and keep the kind of routine going. And of course, there's been a rise of board games. But thinking more laterally, especially during the first lockdown, I started to experience a kind of blending of my home with the neighborhood, and how there was this kind of blurring of the threshold. Usually when I went to work into the city to work, I would feel this tangible separation between I'm going out of my home and into another space, but that's really blurred now, and I feel like my local neighborhood is my playground, and kind of I feel that there's the sense of my world being much larger in a funny kind of way, despite being in lockdown. So that's kind of where I've also been talking to birds, but that's because there's been more of them. So that's another kind of, there's so many on our street. So there's all of these different ways that we've been playing and imagining other worlds during the pandemic. So I might throw it over to Esther, perhaps to kick off and talk about some of the ways you were playing during lockdown.
Thanks, Troy, and thanks so much, Carolyn, for that beautiful welcome. I too am on Untitled Chapter land here on the traditional land of the Boon Wurrung, the extended kind of lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And of course, I also live right in the middle of the Melbourne city. And so in this, lovely small apartment that I've invited you all into today, but in terms of play, I've been finding that, I really am resonating with what Troy was just saying about that kind of extension of that sense of home out into the places where I need to, kind of traverse every day. And not so much that there was a stronger sense of home, because in terms of that feeling of belonging and connection, I've long felt that in Melbourne. But the kinds of things that I would perhaps, be doing or enjoying in my home. So I've enjoyed lots of kind of play as spatial exploration and different ways to kind of connect with and inhabit this particular space. But I've also been taking the soccer ball down into laneways, finding blank walls and just kind of enjoying. I've had moments of, then just encountering other masked people who stop and play, which I would just never have imagined possible in the Melbourne CBD. I mean, I did once also accidentally kick the ball in front of an oncoming vehicle and suddenly felt like I was 7 or 8 years old again and playing in the cul-de-sac where my cousin John, who grew up to be a soccer referee, used to bring all the kids together on a Saturday morning and we'd all play, which was just, wonderful. But I've also been looking for, I guess, all the different ways that the kind of, guided and artistically guided spatial explorations mean that I can have a sense of connecting and owning these places that have generally been for vehicles, for commercial use, for something other, for, some sense that, like these are my streets, but, maybe I'm just kind of, I'm intruding. I've instead felt like this is an extension of space that I can explore where I'm playing, and that sense of agency has been really, really quite extraordinary, and I think also deeply important politically as well as artistically, which goes to that question of what is the city, what are the regions and the spaces that we will all have a much stronger sense of ownership over as we go into these next stages of what community life means, and how we're going to express those expectations politically to make sure that that sense of creative and community life is only strengthened.
Yeah, maybe you'd like to comment on that, Quentin, because you've got a background in tactical urbanism, but have also been looking at how spaces have been shaped and reshaped and changed during the pandemic.
Well, firstly, I guess I would say I would love to do that. My 5-kilometre bubble hasn't allowed me to actually go to my city, to the centre of Melbourne, for a very long time. And that's where I had done most of my research about people playing, and I am fascinated by urban places. But on the topic of limits, I think I've discovered that we can play a lot within limits. The play is usually exploring within limits. And I think that we're discovering more and more about our local places because we're confined to their limits. We don't always hark after the distant and the different. And I, like most people, I think, have come to learn much more about my local place. I live in the city of Banyul, and most of my bubble is the floodplain of the Yarra. And so how I've explored, every nook and cranny sort of within that 5-kilometre radius, paths that I'd never travelled before and would have no reason to, because I was always trying to get to somewhere. But now I can understand that I just am somewhere. And although I hadn't really thought of it as play, one of the main things I've experienced to get away from the everyday life of being in Zoom meetings like this one is just to be out in the landscape and discover things, to not in any structured way, but just to be open to the experiences that are there. And I've come to discover that there are goannas, snakes, wallabies. Almost every day I go overlook the Yarra and I watch platypuses play. And I'd never seen a platypus in the wild before because I never had the time, and I was always trying to be somewhere else doing something else. So for me, it's been quite a profound experience of not going anywhere and not trying to do anything, but just being open and receptive to what's around me. At the same time, I think I've been playing a lot of board games. I have young children, and it's marvelous to rediscover how much value we have in just interacting with other people in these structured ways, and not in such instrumental ways as we might have done when we worked and then relaxed from working. But the play is also something you can work at, to strategize and to teach my children to strategize and to negotiate. And so again, I think we can find all the richness in the small experiences that are available to us.
Yeah, speaking of board games, when I was teaching games, I used to always use Pandemic as a fantastic example of a collaborative game where you're not competing with one another, you're actually collaborating to combat a worldwide pandemic, which was incredibly difficult to achieve, actually. So it just kind of revealed the complexity of these types of massively connected world events. But before I go off on a complete tangent, perhaps what you were talking about there, Quentin, was what N'arweet was talking about a little bit in her welcome, which is coming with a purpose, being present in the world, and connecting and with the world. So I was going to perhaps ask you, N'arweet, if you can kind of speak to any ways in which perhaps First Peoples knowledge can shape place and also play, or provide a frame to play with the world.
Well, playing with the world, I think, when I think about Melbourne, because I was Melbourne made and Melbourne born, in this sort of thing of Yalakatwillam being the traditional names of the people of the river, and watching my city change, or my place change over many generations, and but still reminding myself of the laneways. And one part was like a trauma that I experienced of traveling around and reminding myself of the connections to places through those laneways. And I suppose that was like not quite like a pandemic, but it was a bit a trauma. But remembering a lot of places that I'm seeing change before me now, and thinking about what was there before and what is there now, and how it keeps evolving. I think about all that. I think about certain people were a part of my life in there, and my daughter Jara has been playing with laneways with her project. So she's looking at redefining play in laneways in the city. For me, I've had an opportunity redesigning a previous golf course. So walking around this wetland that the water reclaimed itself on this golf course, that so water reclaimed itself, and it was a privileged set that used that golf course, and now I'm having to be a part of the redesigning the elements of that golf course now to be a beautiful lush parkland. So I'm privileged that I can have that opportunity. I'm always trying to think about how to rediscover. I suppose I've distanced myself from people to a point because I'm on screens all the time. I did have a moment of time working with Brooke Andrews and Brian Martin because of trees and going bush. My original playground when I was growing up after leaving Melbourne, and remembering places in Victoria that I took these young artists on, and remembering the importance of trees and the importance of these markers that still are embedded into the landscape. So for me, it was my memories. So these are my silent partners in my stories, and they were able to bring it to life. So, and then sitting in a place called Swan Hill, and then a lot of people came past and said, "Aunty, what are you doing here?" And then I felt relevant. I felt I still belonged to my own community, because a lot of these were relatives. So the importance of feel that you're relevant, importance of what relevancy you bring to places, even if I have to bring the stories of my ancestors back. The purpose is to remind people that we did live we did challenge, we did bring change, and it's about retelling those stories, but using a medium that can make our city a challenge, but also turning it upside down and reconnecting to some amazing places and creating a different kind of narrative that once was, and once still is. It's that sort of thought I've been playing with, an idea of unpacking, but unpacking it to a point where people can go back and see what it could have looked like before the changes. Over the years, I've seen massive changes. I want young people to experience that, and older people, but taking the intangible and making it more intangible through that medium. So making it playful, making it experiential, and without all the buildings that trap us in something. Somebody said, Aboriginal people, they use it as a thing, the stats and under, qualitative and quantitative materials that Aboriginal people are homeless. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm home. I'm on my home country. When I went up to Swan Hill in that way, I was connecting back with my grandmother's country. So on my great grandmother's country here, my grandmother's country up there. So I was still home. Home is very important, and I want to share. It's open. It's an open invitation to be part of a story that is bigger than themselves, bigger than myself, but it's a part of their story. So this medium or this playable city could have lots of fun navigating that. Thank you.
And listening to you speak, or whenever I have a conversation with you, N'arweet, it's almost like you take my mind on a journey. So when you're speaking, then I was moving all around different parts of Victoria, perhaps even places I haven't been to. I haven't been to Swan Hill, but there is this sense of remapping that I always kind of feel, and it's not even a kind of mapping in the sense of how we think of maps on our phones, like places and coordinates and grids and things. It's a sense of a space that's expansive, and that there are multiple worlds, and perhaps worlds that we don't recognize or can't see always, like the waterways rising up literally, because they're still there, even if they've been concreted over or turned into a golf course. The water is still there, and it finds a way back into the world. And I think that in itself is an imaginative form of play. And when we're talking about play, we don't need to think of just using devices or game mechanics, or it's also what happens in your mind in terms of how you can frame multiple worlds at once. And I think that's something that you've always lived with, is living between two worlds.
And I think you're right there, Troy. It's when I first went on that golf course, when water was rising, what it was traditionally a wetland, as they call it, a swamp. I was privileged. Somebody took a photo of me walking with 2 Cape Barren geese. So the birds were reclaiming and coming back to what they understand was their habitat. There was, and now the pulpabonk is back, the frog that they haven't seen, or maybe it's like you, Quentin, lots of things like the platypus. You haven't had the time to stop and breathe and look at what nature can provide you and demonstrate. We need to open ourselves up to not reading it in a book, but seeing it in life. We've got to bring things back to life, so we're a part of that living organism that Mother Earth provides us with, to change the paradigm that it's still a living, and these beautiful creatures are still a part of our storyboard, still part of our existence. And I write stories about the creation of the platypus. I write stories about frogs. I write stories about the stars. So the children start to see that and create those sort of stories and create their own books from that. So and they're learning language and they're feeling safe with that medium. So if maybe it's being a child again. I love being my child.
It's interesting when you talk about reclaiming golf courses. I was thinking of the case well known in Melbourne that people have gone out and reclaimed golf courses by walking across them. And I was also thinking about the exploring that we do. People like to think about the government limit of 2 hours that we can spend outside. But as an urban design researcher, I'm fully aware most people spend 95% of their time indoors. And now that we're allowed to spend 2 hours a day outdoors, people are going back out and reclaiming and discovering spaces. And everyone is walking much, much more than they used to. Walking places are crowded now. We never had that experience before. So I think this feel of walking through landscapes and seeing what they actually consist of, and the water and the other living things that they're made of, has increased greatly. In fact, paradoxically, because of the fact that we are locked down.
That's such a good point, Quentin, and goes to Troy's framing of this, that we are fundamentally creatures who want to play, N'arweet Carolyn said something earlier, the way that we can use a medium that can make our city a challenge. And, we are creatures that want to make sense, but we also play with structures. And as Quentin says, we have these parameters. So you've got 2 hours, you can have a picnic. There's this many people from this many unvaccinated households. And so our natural tendency is, all right, so how can I kind of, work that system? There's all sorts of cynical ways that we do that as well.
I do it all the time, Esther, and the minister lives near me, the Minister for Health, and he says, Aunty, how are you going today? He thinks I've only been out for only an hour, but I've been out 3 hours going this way and that way. And I thought, I'm having good, I'm okay, because I can keep my distance, I keep myself safe, I know how to navigate ahead, and I just let him, I've challenged him, and one day they're going to find me. But I think that's the human breaking free. We do have boundaries. I do respect that, there are those rules or those laws that we have to be compliant to. But I think there's this thing in me as the child just wants to explore all the time and have those moments of silent reflections of spaces and places and be silent within ourselves, because we, like you said, we always get cluttered, cluttered minds thinking, oh, well, I've got to go to the next Zoom meeting. I've got to think about other ways to talk about things. I've got to, and it's all of that, but creates a different sort of complexities in when you're trying to just learning to breathe, sometimes.
Yeah.
And be peace in yourself.
Slowing down and, I guess feeling the world around you. But the world around us has also been changing in response to the pandemic. And this has particularly been a challenge, but also an opportunity for urban planners and anyone working in public space, when we can. Because we've gone through quite an interesting cycle. I remember this time last year during Games Week in 2020, we ran an event called Restart the World, which Esther was part of. And we were talking about, how are we going to restart the world after this second lockdown, thinking that was going to be the end of it. And then, of course, it wasn't. And then we had Reactivate the World at Design Week earlier this year, which was an in-person event. And that's when Quentin, you posed to me the question of, with all of these parklets popping up around the city, how could we play with them? I mean, what is a parklet, and where do these things come from, and how can we play with them?
Yeah, I suppose it's like a blank slate. Sorry, Quentin, and we can make it a play, adult play. You know what I mean? Just be that we have all these structures up for children to explore. And I see them along the beach. When you want to be fit and looking like Mr. Musclebound, but Miss, I think there's other ways that we could get people to think about just even redesigning it with plants and things like that they can explore, even if it's a little space. I think one of the things that came out of Melbourne City Council, they were talking about this building, what's getting built, that's going to overshadow part of the river. So that it will throw a shadow completely over the river. And they wanted us to put a request in to think about these spaces to be more interactive with communities, even if they're small, to be able to create some story with it. So, they was concerning that they want us to object to that planning thing, the process that Melbourne councils have to do, to be able to say this shadow is going to throw a massive over the river down to where Fed Square is. So it's going to deny a different sort of adjustment to light, natural light. That's all. Sorry. I thought about that one just then.
Well, I think that these urban planning issues, I mean, there's always constraints, right? Cities are spaces that are competed for, right? Where there are others, there are people with different interests and uses and needs, different ideas, and they're always in competition. And I think a good designer always tries to change the brief and always tries to see the constraints as an opportunity. I'm not saying that overshadowing the river is one of the opportunities I'd most like to take on, but I think with parklets, it's an example of where there's something in train. There's an activity in process, and the challenge is to think, well, what else can we do? How can we take it further, and how can we make more of it? Because play is all about exploring and intensifying and challenging. So, and parklets themselves are only one of the changes that's happened. We might remember that streets were more or less closed off entirely for pedestrians for certain periods all over the world. Public spaces in general, councils have been improving them, changing them because of the new needs that we're discovering that we have. So I think it is important to get as many voices as possible in there and say, well, let's not just do this one way, but let's think about all the different ways we might change the streets, because streets are for people. The streets of the city, and as Carolyn pointed out, those pathways were there before the city and the buildings squashed them into the shape they're currently in. But the streets belong to all of us, and I think it behooves all of us to go to our councils, our governments, to represent us and act for us, and to say, we want the streets to offer these other things as well. We want them to offer richer stories, richer opportunities to explore. What's happened with some of the little streets, I think, is very encouraging. What's already been done on Little Collins Street, changing it into a shared surface that tells stories, that has more landscaping, and is not a place for cars. It really helps us to imagine that maybe the streets of the city weren't supposed to be for cars. That those streets were there before cars even existed. And maybe we should reintroduce more things into streets.
Little Collins is my backyard, and I've been delighted to see that change through the pandemic. And I'd been watching with joy the emergence of parklets around the world the last many years, and hoping it would become normal in Australia. I mean, years ago, there was a group of artists who proposed a City of Melbourne grant to occupy a parking space and present an artistic project, and it was sort of met with, oh, well, you know, what, why? But, you know, let's look at what's allowed. Well, you know, if I pay my, you know, few dollars for that space, then I should be able to do whatever I like with it. Where's the law that says I have to put a car in it? And now that we've got spaces for outdoor dining, which of course has been that kind of, you know, so capitalism tells us we need to use this space differently. And so that has a wonderful social function. It's been fascinating to see, you know, the kind of design that emerges. So yes, we need places where people can sit, but then we need to introduce some kind of, you know, lovely, happy feeling greenery, generally something plastic. So we've got planter boxes, lovely rectilinear shapes. We've got seating, and these are sort of repeated across the city. And so we sort of normalize this sense that, yes, that particular piece of road immediately adjacent to the footpath, the only purpose of it need not just be a car. There is this interstitial space of, well, I'm about to cross the street. Do I need to kind of look around and feel safe? I can't do that if there's, you know, 4 lanes of traffic up and down. Or, you know, I am having a chat with someone else is passing, or I'm going to need to move over a little bit, but I can't risk, you know, being part of the danger zone. So how do we then, create cities that have more human zones and less danger zones? So I hope these places stay, but not just for the outdoor dining needs of existing businesses. We really need to take this opportunity to seize that space that has been made available and think about redesigning, rewriting, re-adventuring our cities.
Yeah, and I think that was evident with that the market, Melbourne market, you know, just still goes on. But trying to think of how people navigate where there's a lot of traffic, people go there for an experience, you know, and there's a lot of, you know, issues about people having that area of parking and dropping off, and where do we park, where do we leave things, how do we get this in? But the market was a place where people moved through, connected with, old families had their trade there. It was more of a social outlet for people. Now it's like a minefield, and it's about economics. I think they wasted a lot of money on having conversations for a couple of years, and it still hasn't resolved the issue about the people that eke their business, eke their economics out of that, you know, market. So there's a lot of that complexity that still goes on. And like you said, streets, roads, I suppose it is capitalism, and I suppose how do we navigate around that? Maybe we grow vegetables in those pots out the front of those things. Maybe we just create some little foodie thing all along with the food, eating the food and knowing it was grown in that patch. I don't know, but it's something, you know, it's complex. It's a society. Yeah, and I suppose, you know, who's done that? Who's done it before? Has anybody ever looked at anywhere else, that modelling?
Reckon Quentin might have.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I was going to say that people have largely forgotten or perhaps never knew that Melbourne used to have 2 other large markets in the CBD. There's a street name still there on Market Street, but you know, and they were completely built over, which is a real shame. But we all used to, children used to play in the street until we were all forced onto these small edge parts of it, and that was defined as our place. And I think it is time to turn many of those things around and say, why can't the markets on the hills come back? Why can't the cars remain at the edges and the people take the center again, because people want to be with people. They don't want to be stuck between cars.
Oh, exactly. My mind goes to, you can picture the city of Athens, which is an incredible,
Yeah. I went to Athens, yeah.
very
I loved it on a Saturday market with all the fresh veggies and that. And yeah.
small streets, because obviously they're originally thousands of years old, never designed for cars, the old city, the new city on the old city. And yeah, once a week there's what's called the Laiko, the people's market, and they crop up in multiple inner suburban and outer suburban areas. The streets closed, the market takes place there. There's plantings of fruit trees in city streets. That is quite normal to have oranges growing down your street. It's so this notion that the city belongs to those multiple layers at the same time.
The big streets of the cities were built for promenading and for marching, not to carry several lanes of cars. If we wanted to socialize, we went walking in the street, and people in many parts of Europe still do that. But unfortunately, those things have been pushed out of our cities here.
Yeah, you're right, because I remember taking students to Spain down and walking that promenade, and it was freezing, but everybody and the kids and the dogs and every family's just walked, and I thought, wow, they're right down the centre, and you thought, this is living. And it was freezing cold for me, but I just thought, this is about people, old people, young people, dogs, and just promenading down the street. We don't use the city as promenading, down those streets. We use it as vehicles to protest. I don't know. Thank you. I like that.
Yeah, Barcelona is a really great example. It's a city I like to spend a lot of time in. When I'm not in Melbourne. I haven't been there for a while, clearly, but planning to go back next year, because it is really a city that is playful. And there's a couple of other interesting things about Barcelona, even from an urban planning point of view, because Barcelona also has a gridded structure, and a lot of those grids have been turned into these kind of like public space zones. This is called super blocks, where they're really slowing, not only kind of blocking off traffic, but slowing down traffic to reclaim public space. Also, their so-called smart city strategy is open source. So they have this kind of idea of also playing with I guess the democratic processes of the city itself. And so we can look at these examples. And the reason I bring this into the conversation is urbanization was invented in Barcelona, and that kind of redesign of how the city operates was in response to pandemics and kind of outbreaks of various infectious diseases. And so now we have this kind of opportunity to kind of think about, well, as everyone's been saying, that public spaces, open spaces, outdoor spaces are perhaps central to the experiences of future cities. Even kind of looking into the realm of speculative design, don't want to throw too many ideas into the mix, but I will also say, there's this kind of rising kind of conception of future cities from a solar punk perspective of how, kind of renewable energy and green spaces. I mean, I've been connecting with plants a lot during lockdown as well. Could actually also reshape cities, and so I would say, not only putting people at the center of cities, but plants and animals, and all of the more than human kind of layers as well, including rivers. Rivers can be seen as life forms in themselves. They're just kind of complex life forms. I mean, I play a lot of video games, so this is not a stretch for me to kind of think in this way.
Have you, Troy, been emailing a lot of Melbourne's trees?
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe they can bring their views into the discussion.
Yeah. Well, they have that project, the Love Letters to Trees. So there's working with somebody in the Playful Park project who's reviving that actually through augmented reality. So there's all of these, kind of creative technologies that we can bring into the mix to imagine these worlds or uncover the layers as well. And on that note, I think that I was going to talk a little bit about location-based games, because now you were talking about providing a challenge for engaging with public space, and Esther, you're working a lot with the impact that artists and designers can have on reshaping public space and creating evocative encounters with these types of spaces without having to create large works, taking, I guess, what you could say the city as a material and playing with it. And the irony or the kind of problem with location-based games, and of course the most popular of which I won't name, is that they're mostly played like this. They block people off from the world. They're kind of like walking around like a kind of iPhone zombie. And I've been making games which do the opposite. They ask you to listen and walk and be in place, and then kind of bring in augmented reality as a way to create a dramatic encounter with a particular place. So it's not that any location can be augmented with technology. It's more or less creating a digital layout for a particular laneway or public square or whatever it might be. And so, kind of thinking about how we can, I guess, mix reality, how we can, shape reality through some of these creative technologies.
Is it audible books, like audibles? You put these little things in the air and you're listening, and you have to reimagine. I don't know. Maybe technology will expand to that something will pop up when you're standing there on that wall, the audible, with the audible story. I listen to a lot. I like stories better than I like that better than, because that's my way of understanding my world. So, and I can have little complex issues that I can think about and talk to others about. But, something like if you're listening to us audible, like the audible books, but something when you hit that code, something appears. You're bigger than life, not on the phone.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we've got to be clever.
And this has been the wonderful thing about 64 Ways of Being that Troy and his team have put together. And of course, here it is on my phone, that I could listen to N'arweet Carolyn's voice telling me the story of a particular place, while at the same time I'm being guided to explore. I can point my device and have an extraordinary image appear before me in the place that I'm actually exploring. But yeah, this sense that, as Troy was saying, you're not just pointing your device and shrinking your world and your horizon. This is about urban gameplay and augmented reality that absolutely does augment the space that you're inhabiting. It goes right back to the beginning of our conversation, talking about we're exploring our spaces anew, we're exploring our internal and our external spaces anew. And so I absolutely love seeing the work of artists that uses old and new technologies to give us those layers. I'm going to go back to N'arweet Carolyn's words, using a medium that can make our city a challenge, transforming what had previously been familiar and even forgotten. Familiarity can breed contempt, but it can also make us stop perceiving things. And that's terrible for our mental health. It's terrible for our community life. It's also terrible for us politically as citizens. We need heightened perception. We need to be engaging with the big issues that are affecting our lives. And so when I can, pick up something like this and explore my space anew, I feel an extraordinary invigoration. But there's also that wonderful feeling that, artists walk these streets, artists are curiously looking around the corner and making new things possible. And then I can be part of that for these moments. It's an extraordinary feeling.
Yeah, what triggered my memory, we were working with some street artists, taking art to the street, but performing stories in the street. And I watched these people followed the Pied Piper as we navigated through the way the river did naturally run, when it was full. So they danced, they produced some songs and poetry, but people are starting to Pied Piper and follow that through the city. So it was young people investing in storytelling through moving through the city, and that's art, that's a creative art resource that I saw with young people. And I think it's also like the Dirty Mile that goes on with Gary Foley's production and Lisa Belair's of Fitzroy, Gertrude Street. It's about the life and experience of stories that impacted on the imagination of First Peoples were arrived in that space, in that early activism. And people love going on that journey and listening to those stories of people under the fig tree, around there, down Gertrude Street. It's an experience of just following or just being a part of something that was very instrumental about bringing change for a lot of our community members after the walk-off, after the missions. These are real. They're factual, they're real, but they also have fun. You had fun. It would be all doom and gloom if we didn't, but you know what I mean? It was pop-up theatre in the streets. I think that allows people to be creative. We could record it. We could do all sorts of ways of these imagery. We now can get on the top of exhibition building at Mickelson Street because it's a rooftop there now. You go up the lift and you can look to points in countries, whose country, language group, all of that. And stories could be told. Oh, okay, I know that about that and the distance and why they came to Melbourne. It's all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah.
I think the digital realm, it has extraordinary capacity to connect us to so many things, right? That it's such a rich portal for connecting us in ways that we didn't know before. I think to go back to something that Esther brought up, I think it's key is that it augments our contact and enriches our contact with reality as it already was and doesn't get in the way of it. And so part of the richness and power of the digital media and artificial intelligence is that it can itself disappear. It can just be the portal and not be the thing. I mean, screens have long had that potential, but the way they can personalize the kind of content and context that we receive, and the way it can appeal to so much of us, like know so much about us and our different proclivities, stimulate our senses in so many different ways, so that we're forgetting that it is itself a thing in between us and the wider reality, but just connects us to that wider reality. I think that's the real challenge. So to concentrate on the device, yes, the device empowers all these things, but we have to try and unpack that and think, well, what are the kinds of channels of information, of kinds of experience, of kinds of interaction that it can bring? Because maybe it is making the trees talk, or making us put down the phone so that we crawl underneath something to have a look at it, or pick up something and hold it in our hands. That's the real potential, is to make us look at the rest of the world in a new way and to interact with the rest of the world in a richer way.
Yeah, but I'd love to be a bug for a moment.
Yeah, well,
You know, explore the wombat's cave like a young boy did many years ago. He followed the trail of the wombat, you know, underground. Oh my God, you know, but he learned so much about the life, and somebody does it. Somebody does it, and someone has to do it. And this is an opportunity through this medium, you know, to become a bug, maybe to become something.
To follow the digital wombat.
Yeah, a digital wombat, you know, what existed, you know. It still does. But you know what I mean. It's and the platypus, the story of the platypus telling a story of its habitat and how it came to be.
Yeah, and all of these experiences offer different perspectives on the world, different experiences, different ways of being, and I think that's really important also for
Yeah,
connection and imagination.
and just think about humans, you know, humans. Yeah, that we share this planet with so many diverse things, you know, and we even at that park, because it's not being frequented as much, amazing amount of birds have come back, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lovely boy which we're exploring all that. So it reminds us to look up and see the life of what we share this planet with.
Yeah, humans are not the center of the world, and in fact, when you were saying before, N'arweet, about connecting stories with place, I mean, we have location-based games and all of these creative technologies to do that, and we think, wow, this is such a fantastic new idea. But of course, First Peoples have been doing this for tens of thousands of years, and really, there's a lot that we can learn from that perspective on the world, and also thinking about the future. So we're going to kind of finish up with one last question that you can give a quick response to, and I'm going to put you on the spot here because we are coming, hopefully, out of a pandemic, and this is a huge opportunity to reset and reimagine the world. So, what do you hope for public space in the near future, or even the distant future?
Well, well, we call it Yurumboy, the tomorrows. What does that mean, the tomorrows? But learning to connect to a place that you never thought that a place can present you with something that is more than just a sit down, have a barbecue or have a picnic. The place can be so many more things. So your imagination can allow yourself to imagine what the place could look like and how you would invest yourself into that place. So whether tomorrow's never come, as they say, I remember that growing up, tomorrow never comes, but you'll keep evolving. So these sorts of things is about how we've had enough time to stop and think and reflect and get out of that entrapment of not being able to explore. Learn to open yourself up, even if it's a small little block. All these imagined things occur every day. An ant crosses over, a butterfly flies, something that can be real, but imagined too. That's a long, little brief synopsis of something. So it's that circular talk. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Esther?
Oh, I think I always think of public space as being the kind of space where something can happen, something can emerge that is beyond what the space was ostensibly designed for, or what its purpose, you know, seems to be. And so I think we talk so much about what play means and how play, empowers and connects us and so on. But I think in public spaces, I want that really tangible sense that there are multiple histories and stories and possibilities here. I want a way of understanding what has come before. I want to know when I'm in a space with great certainty that there isn't a default priority for cars or for certain kinds of paid users, that there's just this rich sense of multiplicity and possibility, and that a space is really genuinely open and welcome, that it doesn't inadvertently, systematically exclude a range of people and groups, whether we're with or without disability, whether we've got where we can afford to be in a place or not. If a place is truly public, then that rich multiplicity should always be present and palpable.
Yeah, worlds of possibility, or portals of possibility.
I can only agree with what's been said already, and maybe bring it together to say, yes, we should continue this engagement with places around us that we've learned, I think, during the pandemic. But for that multiplicity to happen, we need to bring people as close together as possible. We've learned a lot about limits in recent times, but we also have to set outer limits. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for Australia and Australian cities is they have so much space and they're not as richly inhabited as maybe they could be. We talked a lot before about markets and street promenades and people coming together. I think we need to find the appropriate ways of making sure that people are not just maintaining their engagement with places around them, but that they're doing that together as much as possible and not just alone.
Yeah, that we don't all get out of lockdown and then just go back indoors again.
And we start to appreciate again that part of the excitement and value of being outside is the other people who we come into contact with and the various ways we can come into contact with them, not just shouting at the other driver.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, and allow urban play to take back the streets for people and for plants and animals and all of the beings in the world. Wanted to end on a kind of more than human, hopeful note. So thank you, everyone, for taking part in this conversation. It's been really super interesting, and I hope that everyone kind of listening can follow up on I'm going to put speaker notes and other links and materials on everyone's work and research and thoughts and philosophies and other things in the world. But let's right now just say thank you for your time. There's no applause from an audience. I imagine perhaps people can applaud at home if they wish. But I'd like to thank you all for coming along this morning and taking part in this event and talking about places people play.
Nongujin, and I'm in your space and you are in my place.
Oh, I like that. Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Quentin. Thanks, N'arweet Carolyn.
Yeah, everyone.